Hi, my name is Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate 5 demo for the piece I call Pre-Catastrophe. For those of you who know, this is of course Dhalsim from the Street Fighter video game series. I enjoy playing as Dhalsim, though I'm far from good with him. I just really like him every now and then, and I love drawing him. I actually realized that I've drawn him quite a bit when I was in the middle of doing this. And I don't mean quite a bit, like 100 times, but I think I've actually drawn him more than any other Street Fighter, which is kind of funny. So this one was a drawing I did many years ago, and I always liked it, and I thought it would be fun to color. I actually started to color this in Photoshop a long time ago, and then abandoned it for some reason. I don't know what it was. And now I flatted him in Procreate using the turpentine brush, and then I just left him in a folder. I don't, again, know why I like this drawing and then keep abandoning it, but nonetheless, here we are, and I have finally finished it. So I guess that's an accomplishment. So Dhalsim got finished. Now he faces to the left in the original. I do flip him at some point because I just thought it'd be cool to put him on player one side kind of thing, and he is symmetrical, which is good, so it doesn't matter. Most Street Fighter characters are symmetrical, but occasionally, especially now with 3D, you have someone who breaks that mold, but since he's symmetrical, we can flip him without any problems. Now, as the flatting is happening, I want to talk about some interesting aspects of this illustration that I have to address when I'm in the middle of it. One is the flame coming out of his mouth is very stylized, and I had to figure out exactly how I was going to represent that effect. Also, his distant arm is not in the illustration, and the reason it's not in the illustration is because when I originally did this, I didn't know where I wanted to put it that was going to make it still look like it was anatomically in the correct place, as well as didn't interrupt, or not interrupt, but didn't conflict with the clear silhouette that we've got going on here. So it was, I guess that's a failure, but at the same time it was a deliberate decision where I was like, I don't want to muck with this. So what do I end up doing in this one? A few things. We'll get to it when we get there, but that was just one of the things that I had to tackle when I was in the middle of doing this. And lastly, how was I going to light a character if, because I didn't want to put him in a dark room, but I want him to have the flame look like it's, a big thing. And so when you have daylight trying to show something that is glowing, it can be tricky sometimes. So that was another thing that I had to consider when I was doing this. Also, as a thing I want to talk about is when I posted this on Instagram, I put yoga, like how he does yoga, and everyone said flame and fire, and I think maybe inferno came up, but nobody said catastrophe, which I thought was kind of surprising. So that's actually what I always wanted this one to be. I don't know why. I don't know. There'll probably be somebody out there that says oh, but when he does yoga catastrophe, blah, 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 blah. But that's fine. That's fine. So I'm going to accelerate the flats process because there's almost nothing interesting about the flats process on this piece. So let's get through it quickly. This is as fast as the iOS version of iMovie will accelerate things, so I wanted this to be done in 3 seconds, but it only compressed it to I don't know, 30 seconds. I'm literally staring at the time bar just go by slowly. Anyways, one thing that you'll notice when we get to the end of this section is I take his arm and I duplicate it and I blur it and I stick it in the background and I lower its opacity so that I can get the other arm in there as a reference point. It's not something that I planned on carrying through to the end, but it's hey, don't forget, you should do something about that other arm. There you go, right there, you can see it. And so that's why that got stuck in there. Here we're just putting on his face makeup. I do slightly adjust it because in the original drawing I didn't like all the spots on it kind of thing, where it was located. And then now we've got the children's skulls in there and finished. Okay, so now we start moving on to the ambient occlusion pass. I'm not going to belabor ambient occlusion in this video. In the last video, actually, sorry, 2 videos ago, I give you links to someone who explains it very thoroughly, so please go check out that video. So here's the ambient occlusion pass, and we're using it to define all these things. Now, something that's interesting is because of the lighting, we have to figure out how we're going to treat that lighting. So I'll tell you right now how I decide to do it, and then when we get there, we'll get to see it in action. Oh, by the way, Dhalsim's skin on his body here is lighter because I've lowered the opacity of that flat so that I can see the separation between his face and his body. That's why you can see through like where his pants are, shorts, his weird bag shorts. Anyways, so what I decide to do is do the normal ambient occlusion pass, which is more or less lighting agnostic, and then I backlight him, and then I use the glow from the fire. I should say I use the backlight so that the glow from the fire looks more pronounced. I have him in sort of a daylight setting. I wanted him to match the other Street Fighter characters that I've recently done, so he just has like a simplistic background, but I wanted the color to kind of evoke his Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter 5 backgrounds. His like Street Fighter 2 background is kind of like blue and green. It's just very vibrant, and with the elephants in the background and all that stuff. But I wanted to go for more of the like dusty streets vibe, so that's why I went with that yellowy tannish color. But then in order to get, because he's in the daylight, in order to get the flame to read, which was the problem that I stated earlier in the video, is I thought, well, if I backlight him, that'll put all the shadow on his front side where the fire is, and then we can actually play with that, and we can use the contrast of the dark side of him to make the flame look brighter. So the way that our lighting will go is we'll have our ambient occlusion pass, we'll have our hard shadow that's created by some sort of a light that's coming from behind him, and then we can create the glow off the fire and then identify where that glow hits, and we can pepper in the sort of like the rim lighting and the effects that that glow will have. So we're layering on these almost post-processing effects so that we can get the look that we're going for. If he was lit from the front, having all that light on the front side of him and then also trying to capture the brightness from that fire would be really challenging. So we completely avoid that problem, luckily, by doing it this way. Alright, let's speed up the rest of the ambient occlusion pass so we can get to the more interesting things. By interesting things, of course, mean this terrible hand I draw in here. So at some point in this illustration, I thought, okay, well, let's have it like one hand is reeling back and the other hand is coming forward, and that'll make it so that they're not completely lined up, one over the top of the other, and it doesn't mess up that silhouette. Unfortunately, it totally messes up that silhouette. I mean, it looks like garbage, and it's badly drawn, and it's taking that curve from his stomach muscles, his abdomen, and making it just a terrible silhouette. So this is like temporary insanity. That's what I'm going to chalk this up to, and we eventually get rid of that. So right now we're going to continue laying in the shadow. Now, similarly to the last piece that I was talking about of the piece called Nux, where I deliberately backlit him in order to simplify the lighting, that wasn't really the choice here, but it does get me still some of that similar what I'm looking for, which is that whole side of it just gets blacked in. It's almost like a Mike Mignola shadow. It's like, boom, this is all filled in. And then we've got his arm casting some of that shadow onto his body. And then we want to use a little bit of this to also define his ribs. So I had the idea of showing the fire coming from down between his ribs really early on, and so I wanted to try and pull this shadow as much as I could over those ribs so that I could really sell that effect. So that's why we really push that, and we don't, open up the ribs to tons of light, because I want to get that same contrast there that I want to get out of the flame that's coming out of his mouth. So there we switch the skin back to full opacity. So now we get that richer look instead of it getting diluted by the yellow in the background. And we're just continuing to go in and paint this, this shadow. Things about the AO paths that I absolutely do like, and I love that they're structural and foundational and all those types of things, but this is the shadow that I just think is super fun to paint in. It's like you're really packing in all that dimension, and you're seeing this shadow work together with the other shadow. And I think as an artist, I think I've talked about this before, as an artist you're always looking for these wins and these sort of like, oh right, this is fun. And I think that this is one of those for me, where it's always like when I get to this stage I'm like, yeah, that's fun, that's the thing where it's going to be really satisfying, and I'm going to start seeing the whole image come together. I think that during the AO pass is the pass where I'm just like, I'm usually in my deepest, oh, okay, I don't know if this is going to work. And then this is where I'm like, okay, cool, it's all coming together. All of that said, I finished a piece like yesterday that I'm kind of like on, so you'll see that eventually. That'll come down the pike. So this is where the shadow being backlit is really quick and easy. You can see there I filled in the entirety of the mouth in shadow, and then we've got some of this dimension now to show how his face rounds out. We're communicating to the viewer how we interpret the geometry of this face by putting this big heavy shadow in where we're putting it in. And then here's where we're also going to be saying to somebody like, okay, this is how I see this face being structured, which is for regular old, I did some art for people to look at. It's just important to communicate what you're going for. When you're in the setting of like a studio, an animation studio or a video game studio, these are critical bits of information that you're communicating to somebody who has to potentially model what you're doing. So though we live in a 2D world, and there's aspects of 2D that gives us strong, interesting shapes, you do have to always be keeping in mind what that's going to look like when it goes into 3D, because some things are going to work. In fact, most things are going to work, especially if you're working with a talented modeler who understands stylization. They're going to work, but then there's going to be things that won't necessarily translate, and you're going to have to work hard to try and solve that so that you're capturing whatever somebody liked about the 2D version in the 3D. And so that's why having a knowledge of like what you're doing, you can break a lot of rules, but you have to know how you're breaking them, why you're breaking them, and that way when it gets translated into full 3D, people understand that. Now, that's not a problem for everyone. I don't want to say that like this is something you should be concerned about. It's more just sort of showing something that comes up when we're talking about art as production art. Okay, so we're getting to the end of this. We're getting to the end of this part of the shadowy stuff, and so then we'll get onto the effects and all that. Okay, so now that shadow's done, and we're going to start doing all the little local color stuff that brings life to Dhalsim. Now, he doesn't usually get shown with like 5 o'clock shadow, but I'm just kind of looking for any opportunity I can to add a little bit more extra there. So we get the darkening around the eyes, which is just a normal thing that people have, and I put in there. And then we get a little bit of that 5 o'clock shadow. So I put that in, I lower its opacity, and then we get a little bit of lightening around the nose and cheeks, some darkening around the elbows and the fingers and stuff, and a little bit of darkening on the nose and the forehead, but then I kind of saturate it up a little bit to just make it feel a little bit more cartoony. So now with the shadow turned back on, we see how much more life that brings, all that little variation, and how that triggers in our brain like, oh, okay, this person isn't made of clay or sculpey or something like that. They're not all even toned across their entire body. So then the next thing is the background, trying to keep the background a similar vibe to some of the other pieces that I've done that are the Street Fighter ones, like the Zangief and the Karin and the... who else did I do? I don't know. Rose, some others. So that was the spirit behind the background here. I try to make the noise present but even, and I try to reduce it around the character, just so that we don't fight with the what's going on there too much. Fight with like the read of the character. You can still see I have that terrible hand in there, so that's gotta go. So now for the flame, what you see here is me just messing with how am I going to actually communicate this flame in a stylized way. What I end up doing is a bit of a painterly gradient that goes from in to out. I also use some color dodge layers, or not color dodge, add layers, so that we can really get that hot, intense look there. In fact, let's take a second and talk about that layer effect. The start of this, we're just going to use white, and we're going to use a soft brush because this is the easiest way to look at this. I'm purposefully going out of that circle a little bit so you can see what it does. Now, oh my god, of course, I put it on the same layer. Oy. Okay. Now, one thing I want to point out is I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly how this behaves as much as I did with multiply. I know I can describe visually what it does, but it's not as clear as like white is transparent, etc., etc. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this to color dodge first. You can see that color dodge doesn't actually do that much when you're using white. If you switch to a color, you do get something that's a little bit more interesting, and you can build up how sort of intense you want that to be by using a color. Just for reference, that's the color I used right there. If we were using Photoshop, I actually have a technique using color dodge that's going to do something similar to what we're about to do with add, although Photoshop also has the ability to adjust the fill as well as the opacity, which has a big impact on what you're doing. We're going to keep this about Procreate though for now. So instead, I'm going to change this color dodge to an add. You see how much more intense everything got. You can also see on a new layer here, I'm going to point some stuff out. This right here is white. We used white. Then you can see right here, we get this really hot, saturated rim, and then it starts to fade off again until we get to our actual color. There's a similar thing happening over here with our color. We've got our color where it's overlapping. It's still not pure. It's not like how white is, where it goes to its natural color. It doesn't really work that way. It's more of an add, where it's adding the brightness. Then we've got similarly a richer, more saturated sort of edge, and then the fade, and then we are getting back to our original color. You can see the same thing happening here on this one. Now, if we adjust the opacity of this, you see it pulls in a bit. It's kind of interesting because it's almost like it's doing a mix of an opacity adjustment and a fill adjustment. If you're familiar with Photoshop, you can see this better if you're adjusting opacity versus fill. And so by using an add layer in Procreate specifically, we can do flame effects and glows really easily. So if I turn this off for a minute, let's just say that we're gonna duplicate this circle, and we're gonna change the color of it, and we're just gonna put it like, here, and then we'll duplicate it again, and we will do something like that and saturate it a bit more and put it like over here. This is just so that we have some colors that we're playing with, and I've got the background and everything kind of dark just so that this is a little bit richer. Let's switch to a purple. Let's just go with a pure purple. So let's say we have something in our scene that's like a shape. So I'll just use this brush I made for my friend the other day. Okay, I'm gonna blow it up too. It's gonna look like shit, but it doesn't matter. I want it to cross all the colors. How can we make this look like glowing purple? Well, there's actually a super simple kind of ham-fisted way that you can do this, and then from there you can adjust it and add more finesse. Duplicate it, and then go up here and hit Gaussian blur and blur it by dragging from left to right. See, it's blurred. but it looks like shit still. It doesn't look like it's glowing because it's darkening, which we don't exactly want it to do. And then we set this to add. It's that simple. And we've got a glow happening. Now, is this awesome glow? No, it's not necessarily awesome glow, and it's a very rudimentary glow, but it starts getting us what we're looking for. In fact, I would even argue you should duplicate this, set it back to normal, and then move it underneath everything. So now this is picking up all of it, and then you can adjust that a little bit based on how intense you want it, or you can adjust this based on how intense you want that, or you can adjust this based on how intense you want that. This is just a simple thing where I wanted to show how add works so that you understand it, but I do want to stress that very rarely is there something where you just set a layer to a blend mode and then all your problems are solved. It's usually a combination of a few layers, some adjustments, some painting techniques, all of these things, and that will eventually get you what you're looking for. Real quick, just to show, let's take this add layer and make it more white and make this more saturated and see what that does. Whoa, I don't like that actually. Let's take this down. I don't know. I think I made it worse. Let's get back to the drawing. So those basic principles are how we handle the glow that you see here in the piece. Now, as I just mentioned there, it's not just about sort of like setting something, set it and forget it. Like, it's not that. You have to really play with it and make sure that you're capturing exactly what you're going for. So you can see we've got a duplicated blurred fire that's creating that add look that's around it. It's set to add. And then we've got some lighting that's happening in the mouth, and some of that is add, but with like a much lower opacity. And then when we work on this glow coming from the ribs, that is also add. It's like a bright orangey yellow that we've then blurred slightly and then lowered the opacity on, and we're tweaking those colors and making sure that it reads clearly. It has to look like light passing through skin, so there's a very specific expectation around what that color looks like, and that's what we're going for. You can also see how I'm putting a little bit more of an intense paint in there. That's another layer on top of it. We've also got some glow in his throat, and we're trying to make sure that the places where we've identified has the least amount of tissue between us and the glow get the brightest, and where there's more tissue or other things like bone, we are putting the most resistance. So that's of course why we have the space between the ribs. We're identifying that little space kind of by his armpit underneath his pectoral, and then we've got the space in his throat and a little bit in his cheek as well. So now we've turned off all of those because I'm starting to put the general fill light that's coming from the shadowed side of him so that we can set him in his environment a little bit more. And we're getting, I don't know if we're close to losing that ugly backhand, but we'll get there. And so now this right here is just doing the same select paint, select clear method that's linked below, that but we're doing it now with this bounce light instead of doing it with the shadows or anything else. I just lowered the opacity on it, so now you can see sort of what that's going to look like when it's all finished. And that's what I'm doing actually in that moment as well. I'm saying, like, what is this going to look like? Let's lower that opacity and really see what the lighting is going to do. Now, the reason why I have the glows off is because in some ways you could say that this lighting is going to happen with or without those. And it's nice to be able to isolate these. As long as you know that they'll all play nicely together, it's nice to isolate them, and that way you're just thinking in your head about simulating light in one way instead of having to balance all of it at the exact same time. Some of the major stages that we still have to do is I go in and I put in some extra darkening around the skulls and around his chin and stuff, just to really make sure those push and have a nice shape to them. And then we also are going to put the highlight from the lighting that's coming from behind him. One thing I also want to note is that once I got that bounce light in there on his like chest and his face and stuff, I also put that reflection on his eye, which is done with the exact same layer, by the way. That's just lowered in opacity. There's no layer effect to that bounce light. This darkening on the skulls is, I think, maybe even just black, that I've lowered the opacity of, and then this shadow that's going in is that big blotch that I have turned on there. I had that sort of stuck up in the top right as its own layer that is just set to normal the whole time, so I could sample it whenever I needed to. And so this is just me using that color again to punch up like the area under his armpit and the area by his chin and things like that. We're working on the highlights. So you can see on the top of his head we've got some, on his eyebrow, and then we'll be working our way down. Usually with the highlights, because I don't want to push anything to be like too shiny, I don't really use Select Paint, Select Clear, because I don't necessarily go through every layer and make sure every layer has been addressed that way. I usually just kind of move around and put it where it makes sense, and occasionally I'll look at my layers just to say like, oh right, there's that layer, should that have gotten something like that, and I'll use those layers still to do some occasional selections, but it's not as thorough of a process as the shadows, because I don't want to key as high. Now we're doing the bounce light. You can see there's little areas that are getting some bouncy love, and some extra just hey, maybe this would affect that, so let's paint that in there. Like on his eyeball, we just got some reflection from his nose. And on the teeth, you can see, I mean, this is an obvious opportunity to start putting a little bit more of how that flame is affecting things. Some of these little layers that are flickering on and off is just me saying like, let's get a little more of this, or let's get a little less of that, or let's turn this off and see if it works. And really that's just capturing that aspect of this whole thing. That aspect being when you're saying, is this working, is that working? And the time lapse captures all of your sort of togglings, and that's just, you know, as an artist, you're verifying that you're not going crazy, basically. This is the stage where I'm also putting a little dark outline around everything at a very lowered opacity, just to give it an interesting vibe. I do also, I treat it almost like it's paint that's been dragged a bit, and I put a little highlight on it as well, which I will make sure to zoom in on so you can see exactly what I'm talking about when it happens. I can feel it. I can feel that hand's about to go bye-bye. I already got the elbow, because the elbow looked like it was a back joint, and I didn't want that vertebrae to conflict with the elbow. Putting in some extra bounce light on the skulls. It just happened very quickly. And now that fist is gone. We get rid of all the layers that were affecting that fist, and we start figuring out what we're going to do. So I go in with the pencil and I just quickly draw in again. Actually, I think it's still turpentine brush, I can't tell. And I just quickly paint in, okay, what would it look like on the other side? What would his posture be? Once I figure that out, I just make sure that it's knocked back plenty and that it's not conflicting with the read on everything. I think I break it a bit with an outline, yeah, right there on his fist, so that it's definitely pushed back, and I feel like the silhouette still reads fine, like the whole thing hasn't been compromised by including that. And right now I don't actually know what's happening on the piece, so if you can figure it out, comment below. Quick zoom in showing that highlight on the darkened rim that I was talking about right here. last bit of tweaking I do is I use that background speckling to sort of bring some extra little attention to the flamey area right there. And this is the final version of the illustration. Ultimately, I'm glad I waited so long to paint it because I do like the way that it came out. I don't know that it would have come out like this if I had painted it earlier. I think all the lighting really works. People have commented that they like the glow coming from the ribs. I was very excited to paint that part, and I think it came out good, so I'm really happy that people like it. So here's Dhalsim, another one of the great world warriors. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me. Hey everyone, and I also want to remind you that I am now on Ko-fi, a simple website where you can just toss somebody a couple of bucks so that they can buy something as simple as a coffee. You guys have asked how you can contribute to the channel. This I felt like was the lowest impact way. It's not like Patreon where if I don't deliver, you guys feel like shit because you gave me money and I couldn't do something. It's literally just like whenever you feel like it, you could do it. And if you feel like it once a year, if you feel like it once every 2 years, it's all good. It's a nice, no commitment flavor of support. Ko-fi.com/Zatrancis.